Give me one.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a rainy night in October for our Arts, Culture, Education, and Street Life Committee. Pleasure to have you here. Pleasure to have everybody upstairs in the Zoom. Before we start, perhaps today being what it is, we'd like to take a moment, just a minute to remember a day 22 years ago. Folks who suffered then and folks who are still suffering in our friends. Okay, thank you. Again, welcome again. What we might want to do is just go around the table a little bit and introduce ourselves. We have a couple of new members. And I'll start with
Hi everyone, my name is Josephine Ishmael and I'm the co-chair of this committee. And I'm very happy to see everyone tonight. We're back sort of in person / hybrid, and I'm so thankful for everyone showing up tonight.
Lovely. I'm Katie Stokes. I'm a member of this committee, and I'm also one of the co-secretaries of the board. What else do I serve on? Oh, and I serve on Health, Housing, and Human Services.
I'm Tamara McCall. I'm a public member of the committee, and I work in the neighborhood.
Hi everyone, Matt Green. Nice to see everyone. In addition to serving on this committee, I'm also on the Parks, Waterfront, and Environment Committee.
Hi everybody, I'm Wendy Gonzalez. I am a member as well that serves on the Business License and Permits Committee.
I'm Montana Vest, and I'm a member, and I also serve on the WPD.
Hi, Ingrid Chanko, member.
And I'm Charlie Todd, member of this committee as well as transportation and Hell's Kitchen resident.
and I'm also a co-chair. I want to welcome Ingrid back to this committee, to the respite. And also I serve on transportation as well. Just a couple of business items for those of you who are new. Oh, we have David, introduce yourself. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is David Warren. I serve on this committee. I also serve on the Transportation Committee. Glad to see everyone virtually tonight.
And Wilson.
Wilson, you want to unmute yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Wilson Cano. I'm also on the Health, oh my goodness. Housing
and
Human Services.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir. I went blank there for a moment.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. So as you know, we're here hybrid. We're all required to be here in person unless you're excused for some condition that we don't know about. So going forward, we have a couple of presentations this evening. Generally, what happens is after the presentation, the committee will ask questions. We'll go around the room. We'll give any public members that have signed on a chance to also ask questions. We'll come back to committee for some comment and whether or not we're taking some action, whether it's a letter, that sort of thing. If that's the only action thing. So we've got a couple of very interesting presentations this evening. Then we're going to get into the favorite thing of what we do, and that's the budget. And then have a quick discussion on, or a long discussion on this. So with that, I believe Randy, There's Randy. Randy, welcome back. It's been a long time. You're on you.
Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? My name is Randy Berry. I'm the executive director of IndieSpace. For those of you I haven't met before, although this is my favorite community board. So I think I've met quite a few of you a bunch of times. I was asked to come today just to talk a little bit about what's going on for indie theater as a result of COVID and closures and reopening and the heightened infection again and how that's impacting theaters, and also what IndieSpace is working on for organizations in the district. So I thought I would just like chat a little bit about that, and then I'm hoping I can answer some. Wow, there's an amazing light coming in, even though it's pouring outside. I don't know if that's happening there too, but I thought a new light came on. Anyway, but happy to answer any questions as well from the group about things that are happening in the community and in your district, if you'd like. Does that work for you all?
Sure.
Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know IndieSpace, we are a not-for-profit, a service organization that supports indie theater makers in New York City with funding, professional development, real estate advisory and consulting services, and advocacy. We work with a large number of organizations and individual artists that live in the CB4 district. We help them with funding, personally and professionally. We give mental health grants, we give grants for performance, and we most recently did a big venues grant, a re-grant called the Little Venue That Could. These were $10,000 general operating grants that went to small venues with budgets of $750,000 or less. Several of those grants went to organizations that are in CB4. And then we also do a real estate advisory and consulting program, which is the program that I've spent the most time at the community board talking about. We work with arts organizations that are facing a real estate transition, challenge, or opportunity. We help coach them through the signing of new leases, the graceful closure of their doors, sometimes, unfortunately, quite a bit in the last few years. And we help them as they're facing whatever transition or opportunity that they might be presented with. So sometimes that means a renegotiation of their lease, working with their landlord for non-payment of rent, helping them through rethinking their spaces during the COVID closures and reopening, helping them with their HVAC and whatever kind of construction that had to happen in their spaces during that time. And then we like to work a lot with the city council and the community boards in helping us carve out affordable spaces for artists in your districts. We were able to work on a 99-year lease with CB2 with a developer in that neighborhood. They carved out a small arts and culture space. We worked directly with the community board to help think through what that lease might look like. And then they negotiated with the developer a 99-year lease, and that space opened in January, called the West Village Rehearsal Co-op. We've served 700 artists in that space already so far, with a max rent of $10 an hour for space. So there's been a lot going on. It's not just COVID, right? It's the kind of the aftermath, I would say, with some work from home, right? That has impacted theaters and a reduction in audiences. So it's a real transitional time for the community. There's also been a real impact on a lot of the larger institutions. Those, we don't generally work with the larger off-Broadway institutions, but there is a trickle down. The similar, like if you've noticed across the board, we're seeing reductions in staffing and in their seasons. So several theaters like the Signature, the Public, a bunch of theaters across the country have decided to do 30% less programming or 40% less programming this year in order to reduce costs. The extreme increase in the cost of labor and the cost of materials with the reduction in audience has been tough. It's been tough for arts organizations. And I think, our big task right now is going to be, creating support systems around the individuals that are living in our neighborhoods to make sure that they can afford to stay and weather this moment. And something else we're also thinking quite a bit about is sharing the resources of space. So if the Signature Theater is doing 30% less programming, what organizations in that district might be operating without a theater right now that could use up that space, 30% of that space. So we've talked in this community board meeting about the new federal theater, for example. This is a solution that we're working quite a bit on with the new federal. New federal is losing its space right down the street at the All Stars project. We think a great solution might be offering them space at Signature that just furloughed a bunch of folks and might not be doing as many shows over the next year to 2 years. So we're thinking about sharing resources. We're thinking about private and public collaboration. We're hoping that philanthropy might be able to play a real role here in relieving maybe some of the larger institutions that are suffering, and in doing so also help the smaller organizations along the way. Something else that we're thinking about a lot is street safety, right? This is also impacting some of the small theaters in CB4, especially. We're hearing quite a bit from some of the smaller theaters that are already struggling to keep their audiences coming back to their space. So there being an effort and attention paid around street safety would be hugely helpful for the small organizations that don't have the budget at this point to hire their own security and things like that. I want to also mention that there's a lot of hopeful things happening. The small organizations that we work with, they're innovators. We want them to be supported all the time, and so that they're not constantly having to be resilient and innovate, but they are resilient and they do innovate. So we are seeing these partnerships naturally occur. We're hearing about collectives working together to operate space. And we're seeing also a real interest from philanthropy, private foundations, and the city wanting to think about where they could put resources in order to buoy organizations to keep them open and operating. So that's my little state of the field. If anybody has questions, I would be happy to talk through them.
Randy, before I turn over to the committee, could you just follow up on something? On the CB2 relationship you said, could you just talk a little bit how that came about?
Yeah, I would love to, actually. It was very exciting. So like I've visited you all, I've been visiting with CB2 quite a bit over the last 10 years. And a developer came to them as they were, preparing to go through the ULERP process, and the community board had them commit. And we had it documented and signed to, and then sent, Matt might know about this, but sent to Speaker Johnson's office at the time, so that the arrangement was documented ahead of time so that we could hold that developer to their commitment throughout the ULERP process. So they agreed to carve out, it's 2,000 square feet in the lower level of their building. They were providing it to the community for $1 a year for 99 years. And once the building was developed, the community board had that commitment letter and a few agreements that we helped them craft. And then the community board put out a public call to operate the space. So a bunch of us started going to the meetings to operate, and IndieSpace put together a collaborative, a co-op. So we decided to work with Here Art Center, the New Ohio, and Rattlestick Playwrights Theater. Those are 3 local in the community board theaters that had been around for at least 20 years each. And we put a co-op together. So IndieSpace operates the space 6 months out of the year, and each of those local partners operates or gets 2 months of rehearsal space out of the year. And so we're seeing hundreds of artists in and out of the space. We have a 99-year lease. It took a while for us to work through the lease. The developer participated in some of the capital, like for us to put a sprung floor in the space. And they've been working with us really beautifully on activating it. So we cut the ribbon in January of 2023. It was a 4.5 or 5 year process from start to finish, but it's going to serve artists in the neighborhood, well, for 99 years, we hope. There's a commitment also to relocate us if necessary. After the building is sold, they can relocate us within that building or within another building in the district. So there was, you know, it was an interesting lease negotiation, I'll tell you that. It took us months and months. So, but it was good.
Sounds great. Okay, we'll go through committee now.
Well, that's just, you're doing such incredible work. So first of all, thank you so much for that. But I'm curious, how do we find a developer in CB4 to do something similar? I mean, I know the developer came to them, but is there any sort of way that we can start looking at spaces here? Like, how does that process even begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have, like you all, a very strong arts and culture committee, and they pushed very hard from the very beginning when the developer first came and presented the project to the community board. I think it's an excellent template, and I know David Gruber, who helped us put it together at CB2, would love to talk to people about it being a pilot and a template that others could replicate. It really, I think it came down to an agreeable developer that planned on doing quite a bit of development in the neighborhood, so wanted the community board on their side from the beginning. And it should be one of several projects that they're working on where there's a cultural carve out. The community board, because so many artists had been priced out of that neighborhood, really prioritized with any new development, arts and culture space.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pass it along, but I just want to, you know, before you get off the call, just want to get some ideas on, you know, a possible letter that we can write. What can we do to actually help? You have so many initiatives going here. So, you know, where can we be the most useful would be my question. So you can give that some thought and, you know, you too, Katie.
Thank you. So I actually think it may be a similar question, because I was just wondering, like, do you have like a specific ask today for us? Something that you've identified where we could be potentially specifically helpful? Because in some ways it seems, but I could be completely wrong here. It seems like sort of space for arts institutions, actual space is not our biggest challenge here in CB4, right? Like there are a variety of spaces. But is it sort of helping coordinate, or I don't know, sort of how people can access it or something? So anyway, I'm just wondering, how can we be helpful to you? Is there any specific ask you have today that we could help with?
You know, I don't know that it's well, I guess one specific ask would be to consider yourselves a hub for that type of information and to work with an organization like IndieSpace to help us. Oh, I'm sorry, my dog is barking at the thunder. So to help IndieSpace create, sorry, those partnerships when that information comes through to you, right? So when arts organizations come to you and say, we're lost for space, right? So New Federal came to you all, we're working with New Federal, but I'll use them as an example because Elizabeth has been so vocal in working with the community board to try to find a replacement. One other thing we could do is that, like at the beginning, right? 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when we found out that All Stars Project was going to be sold, letters from the community board in support to the Department of Cultural Affairs potentially at that time. This was an opportunity to save that space and to be competitive potentially. We were hoping somebody would buy it, right? And be able to secure New Federal in that space permanently, like they deserve permanent space. So I would say, as like a pass through of information as centers of your community, if you hear of arts organizations that are being priced out or are in danger of losing their space, or of others that are having to reduce the work that's happening in their space, let's think of this as a hub for information where we can connect each other, because that's what's going to keep these doors open. The other piece is really, I think a lot of it is about street safety too. I mean, this is a big place. If people don't feel comfortable walking into the theaters, they're not going to. They're going to go home. So it's a big issue. It's an issue like throughout the city. I know that the Chain Theater and the Tank Theater are two of our biggest small theaters in the city. I'll say that, in the entire city. Between the Chain and the Tank, both on West 36th Street, they probably see more audience and more artists than many of the theaters in the district combined. Like thousands and thousands of artists are working in those two spaces, or there are 4 spaces in that building, but they're having a really rough time on that block, right? So like we have to take the theaters that are thriving at this moment and that are continuing to do that work and put systems of support around them. So that would be street safety funding, right? Like writing letters of support for funding when they need it. When they're going after capital funding, that could be support that comes from the community board. And then these developer projects, I mean, what we did in community board 2 was really, really helpful. And the community board was critical. It was the most critical piece. It wouldn't have happened without the community board stepping in.
And had there been a letter or like an agreement beforehand? And community board 2 said, hey, we voted and we are committed to keeping an eye out for any development that may be coming to our area. And when we hear about it, we're going to try and get some art space set aside. Like, had they decided that ahead of time, or did they only decide it when that particular development came to them?
I believe they had set it as a priority for the community board, because that, you know, that community board has a major loss of artists, you know, being completely priced out in Meatpacking, West Village, Soho, like that area. So it was a priority for that community board so that they were ready when the right developer came to the table.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, it's going to be it's Tamara. Hi. Something that you said was like how the big ask is to create systems of support for those that live in the district. And I think about that all the time. And what you cited was the reduction in both sort of, we see it in small organizations, but when you cite the large ones that are reducing those staff and programming, that trickle down. And so I'm thinking through, since we know later in our agenda is going to be looking at sort of district needs and the budget process, which we have a role in as a community board, is there something that could be either piloted into DCLA? Is there some agency that we should be advocating for certain resources? When I think about the amount of federal money that was able to sort of pop up at certain moments of time, but we're very much still in the aftermath and living with COVID, rise of COVID again. And so your thoughts about anything where we could be working with, you know, city agencies to think about funding models or new pots of money, or, and I go up through that. Like, there was a lot of things for direct funding to artists that came out during COVID. I would love to pick your brain on what that is, and as the community board, can maybe advocate for that?
Yeah, I'm glad for that question. So yes, I do think that there's some advocacy that we could be doing with the Department of Cultural Affairs, certainly. And also something that I didn't even mention, which is top of mind, is affordable housing, obviously, for artists. The fact that artists are not a protected group that is able to be prioritized in affordable housing lotteries is a travesty in New York City, when we need artists to live and work here in order for New York City to be a place that other people want to live and work and visit. So I wonder if there is probably some advocacy that the community board could do around that, making sure that we, you know, put some real attention towards artists and affordable housing. And then with the Department of Cultural Affairs, you know, so I'm thinking about housing. We're thinking about, with the Department of Cultural Affairs, I think there has to be some tie between larger institutions and the smaller institutions. If the larger institutions, you know, they're pitted against each other quite a bit right now. The individual artists and the smaller institutions are pitted against these larger institutions that do take up quite a bit of resources. But if we can use the access to those resources in order to help the individual artists and the smaller companies, I think everyone can get around these larger institutions being bailed out a bit by the city. So yes, I think advocating for a funding source that relieves the larger institution, but as a requirement, brings smaller institutions and individual artists into the organization is a win across the board, which is what we need to see right now. There's too much, there's there's a tension there, right? Because so many individuals are suffering and so many resources get put into big buildings. But we have the buildings already. So we want to try to bolster everybody with funding resources that get circulated. There's a way for us to circulate them.
Yeah, hi, I was just curious if you had an update on the 705 10th Avenue site, the DEP site. I mean, I know other committees on the community board have been dealing with that, but I saw on your website that that's opening in 2026, 2027. Is there a way we can help advocate, speed that along as this committee?
Thanks for asking about that. We're very, very excited, and we were supported in the budget this year for capital for that project. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around this project, and the artists that we serve are through the roof excited about this project. So thank you all for your support. I believe we're from our perspective, we're on schedule. It's going to take a while. I think that the developer, Entertainment Community Fund in Douglaston are doing their work. And right now we're negotiating the final terms of our lease. We have a solid LOI, and our attorneys have all been working to just hash out last details. They gave us a very, very favorable lease, 60-year term, so we consider it permanent. And we're at $15 a square foot. So we're very excited about it. And we think we're going to be able to provide thousands and thousands of artists affordable space in that building. So I don't know that there's much at this point that you all can do, except that more than what you've done, which was very helpful. But I'll come, I'll come back to you if we find something that we do need your help and support on. I'm sure when we're getting closer to opening the doors, there's going to be a lot that we'd like to do. Maybe you host your next meeting in that space with us.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. Yes. Let me just introduce myself to you. My name's Emily. I'm a journalism student at NYU in the graduate program. I just was curious, you mentioned a couple of times the safety about I'm just curious, why are people feeling unsafe? I don't know anything about this topic. Can you talk a little bit why people feel unsafe, visiting the theater, or what is sort of going on in theater districts that's making people turn around and go home?
We're just hearing from the theater that they're having a hard time keeping. There have been some incidents with the homeless population on the block and some drug use, right in front of the space and even in the lobby at one point, right? So, and they're small budget organizations that don't have a big security staff. So their lobby isn't manned at this point. So really, if they're open to the public and people are coming in for shows, they've just had a difficult time with that. And it's not all the time. And they actually, the chain specifically mentioned the community board has done a lot, and the business improvement district has done a lot, and it's been better. But I do think that at this point, when things are just a little bit tenuous for everyone, every little thing counts. Any little thing that we can do to make it more appealing, more interesting for people to leave their homes if they're working remotely and come into the city to come see, a show, or to leave their home and be in the space is a good thing.
Thank you.
It might be helpful to have Shane and Tane come at some point and get a little more detail, and then we can sort of figure out what to do from there.
Jesse and Mike with his hand raised and hands. Just a follow up on how you find this.
I'm sorry, Alan, you want me to bring Mike Freeman over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually they'll come to land use units. So we have to hook up the land use and get a heads up. Some of them are looking for community space to expand their own buildings. So they're out there. Mike, you're on.
You can go ahead and speak.
Oh,
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't realize. My name's Mike Freeman. I'm a band leader and a music producer. I was just curious if IndieSpace incorporates funding for music programming and or grants for music programming.
We generally do if it interacts with other live performing arts. Our organization was built around indie theater spaces, but we also know that everything is hybrid these days and multidisciplinary. So if there's music programming that overlaps with other theater dance type programming, we do support that.
But not just music on its own, music concert.
Unfortunately, no, that's not part of, it wasn't our mission when we originally incorporated it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a quick follow-up on something we did a while back. The small theater report that came out in 2019, which you helped, help us put together. And of course, COVID came along. Have you seen anything come out from that report in terms of either the mayor's office doing something to put it out, or Department of Cultural Affairs? Are they using that as a stepping stone for any enhancement for cultural revenues? Is there anything happening with that report? I mean, everybody gave it great praise, and it's really quite a one of a kind report.
I think everything that report was excellent and necessary, and it was not this group of organizations is never studied and people don't report on it. So it was really very appreciated. COVID did change everything. So it all needs to be updated. We're not in the same, one reality is the same, is that we were living on the edge before COVID, right? COVID just kind of put a magnifying glass on the way that arts and culture exists in New York City, especially small organizations, especially those founded by and operated by artists of color. So that report was helpful and extremely necessary. And now I think we need an update to it already, because the environment is so completely different than it was. I think the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment is working on an update to some reporting, I believe, and I hope I should know more by the end of September about that.
Thank you.
Is that something that we should advocate for? Like that great report from 2019 clearly needs to be updated? Like is that an ask that would be helpful?
I think it would be very helpful. A lot of small arts organizations point to that report and content from that report in their grant applications when they're advocating for themselves with their elected officials. And because small arts organizations don't have the budget to do that type of research and reporting on their own, it's the only source to point to. So yeah, I think that would be an excellent effort.
Cool. Any questions? So do we want to move on anything? The committee want to propose a letter of some kind, or we can certainly do something and push the mayor's office. Do it as 2 separate letters, perhaps? Just a quick heads up to the mayor's office, and do something else specifically towards Department of Cultural Affairs. Something. Any thoughts?
My thoughts are all scattered. I think it would be great for us to advocate for this report to be updated, right? So I guess that would be writing to the mayor's office, is that it? There's also, I think, just this question of should we, I don't know, ask our full board, or I don't know how it's done. But say like we want to acknowledge the importance of affordable housing and for spaces for artists, and that when any group in our community board hears about developers can we say that we would like to advocate on behalf of artists for space? I don't know if that makes sense or.
I think that's a smart move. So Jesse, could that be like an internal memo? So it could go to land use and so people know that that's something that we're looking for, like Joe's group, I mean, the whole.
You're on mute, Jesse.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think it would be good to have a conversation at exec about it, because there is a long history of that already, kind of that advocacy happening in our district. Actors Fund has a number of buildings. You know, one of the largest ones is on 57th Street, which is specifically for people in the arts and culture, and obviously Manhattan Plaza and things like that. And so I think it'd be good to have a conversation at exec about it. I also think we've got a lot of future development in the pipeline in different phases that we can talk about, specifically at least about affordable housing. It might be good to have I keep on saying the Actors Fund. It's no longer called the Actors Fund. I apologize for anybody. I don't mean to be insulting. I just know it as the Actors Fund. It's Randy, what is it? The Community Entertainment
It's the Entertainment Community Fund, but don't worry, you're not alone. We all call it the
Entertainment Community Fund. Who Barbara Davis, if anybody remembers, used to be on our board. She used to co-chair the housing committee. We could have them come, and that they could easily probably provide us with some great data as to what the real numbers on the, for affordable housing for the arts and culture folks. That might be a helpful baseline for you all to do some advocacy work on. And then the other thing I was just going to bring up, which isn't about affordable housing, but there was a huge amount, if everybody remembers David Pincus, who used to be the co-chair of this committee, he was always advocating for us to bring the task related, because there are a number of commitments for cultural arts and culture spaces from the Western Rail Yards Agreement, which is the phase 2 of Hudson Yards development, which is yet to be done. And so I think it would be good for all of us on this committee to bring this up at exec maybe and build a list of actual things, maybe commitments that are already that have been made and that we need to follow up on, and where they are in the pipeline, and then also get some real foundational data on to what's been built in our district for arts and culture folks, and what should be our goal.
Sounds good.
So, but in connection with the letter, it sounds like there would be, or we could propose a letter to the mayor's office regarding updating the 2019 small theater report.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah, Jesse, do you remember back when we had extra money and we were gonna have someone, this was a few years ago, we were gonna have someone find all these small theater spaces, get a list of all of that in Chelsea Hell's Kitchen area? One of the interns, we were gonna pay someone to do that.
I remember that was discussed. I don't know if it was specifically about theaters, but I think it was about community facility space, my recollection. But I think the report that Randy was talking about, that Alan brought up, really was the kind of thing that did that, where we were hoping would do that for us. I don't know if it really did that for us, specifically to our district.
Right.
The question is whether that happened or not. No, it did not.
Okay.
It did become a budget request out of this committee for many years.
I know.
And so I do, and we can, listen, there's, as I'm sure Randy knows, there's additional cuts to agencies being proposed, as we speak and happening, and I'm sure DCA is probably one of them, and the agencies that's going to get hit. So We might be hit too, by the way. Yeah, that study never happened. So the report, a request for update for the report I think is a good idea. We just did have, I just want to remind everybody, we did have the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment here last month or 2 months ago at this point, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to remind us that they were here. So we should look back at that committee meeting, maybe for some helpful data and some from helpful points.
Okay, so we had a motion to table for at least one of them.
Sure, I shall move.
Okay, here you go, second, all in favor? Super.
Aye.
Yeah, can we just, Alan, just
Yes, sorry, I
because
thought-
we got virtual and
Yeah,
everybody in,
yeah.
well, hold on one second, David. Did everybody in the room vote yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so and there was no other opposition or abstention. Okay, now we can go to virtual. David?
I vote aye.
Okay, great. And I saw Wilson's hand. Okay, thank you.
Also raising-
Aurora, I saw you too. I'm sorry, I saw your hand. Aurora, can
No
you?
worries, thank you.
You need to come off camera though for that. I'm sorry. There we go. And now say aye.
Oh, aye, sorry.
There we go. Thank you.
Jesse, I'm sorry, I apologize to you, but I tried to text you, I couldn't text you. There's a police action going on at Alice's Garden right now. It's taped off. I'm looking out my window. So,
All right, thank you.
heads up.
Yes, can I ask, so is it piggybacking off of what Randy had proposed of like, how to think about artists as a protected class in sort of housing lotteries, like policies around large and small institutions, and that's really innovative. Should be like, is there some invitation to DCLA? I'm like, is there some letter of support that we can give to those ideas? Where does that get considered? I'm just trying to think how we can help push that forward, or at least get more insights into that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. They were invited to come tonight, but I don't know, Jesse, for some reason they couldn't come, so we can.
I'm sorry, we're talking about DCA.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did invite them to come a couple times. I never heard back. So I need to follow up again. We can keep on them for October.
Yeah. So I think this committee sent them a letter about, was it 5 years ago before COVID? Very detailed, this is when Ingo was still chairing, and a very detailed list of how, suggestions that could be helpful to keep lowering the Con Ed bill. They have very good suggestions. And I don't know if there was, not really a response. They didn't come tonight, so I guess we could,
And I've been in numerous budget committee meetings, and it always gets the arts, no matter how hard I would fight at the table, Alan knows. It just gets bumped down on the priority list.
We may also want to try the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. DCLA, I think would be great to get them here at the table and sort of get an update on budget priorities and how much is going to culturals in the district. But I think that policy issue is like, it's such a tough nut to crack.
Yes.
And I know it's been a discussion to update that policy for many, many years. A lot of it has to do with sort of like the non-traditional income that artists make, and it fluctuates, and each PD, when they're getting their applications for the lottery, they're really looking at sort of like gross adjusted income, and that changes for artists year to year. So you could have an excellent year one year, and then the next year, you don't have a lot of work. And so you have a lot of eligible families and individuals, but they get disqualified for that. It's been a really tough issue for, I think, each PD to think through. But that might be the agency where we might have better luck engaging with. And I think it might, so just a suggestion, I think it's, and I also, just full disclosure, I work with Randy for my day job. So if there are letters of support on behalf of IndieSpace, I'll recuse myself. But I think just generally, I think that's a great policy discussion about affordable housing for artists and how to make sure they qualify. and can get those units.
Matt is pointing, just FYI, to a hugely important issue. I mean, aside from it being a protected class, the fact that artists just have no shot once if they actually get pulled in a lottery because of the way that their income is situated. It's a huge issue, and it also just intimidates artists from participating in the process altogether. So,
you know, the
would be.
Actors Fund. Yeah, the Actors Fund actually, because they're a HPD ambassador, so they help artists when they're filing applications, like go over their income and how to apply. So if we're thinking about inviting folks, maybe it's not necessarily a city agency, but having the Actors Fund come in and they can talk about sort of what they're seeing with the number of applicants that are applying, how many get denied, what are the challenges and barriers that they're facing. So I think the Actors Fund, not only could they provide, I think, an update on sort of, I think, the district and the needs, but also I think some of the challenges with qualifying artists for housing. So
That sounds like a great invitation.
And the last thing I would say is the piece about the safety. I sometimes feel that, you know, our institutions can be anchors that actually are like hubs of community and could be amazing partners in addressing challenges that neighborhoods have, but yet we're talking about the financial challenges that they have already. And I'm always thinking how both the public and private sector can incentivize that kind of work, whether you're thinking about people that are unhoused, you're thinking about sort of the current migrant crisis that we have, we think about public safety. There was, back in my sort of past jobs at BAM, when I was chairing the Business Improvement District, we did a lot of work working with the DA's office, hospitals, trying to think through a lens of real care about some of these issues that we were having, and it was sort of long and we were in the trenches. But there was funding that really enables all the partners to be able to do this work. And so that's where also I'm curious to say, who's out there that can support institutions like, you know, Chain and Tank in being able to even, you know, address some of these issues.
Where did that funding come from when you did it with?
It was a mixture of, part of it was funding that we got through sort of work with the DA's office and the police. So it was like private foundations work. We did some through SBS, actually. I think they did some funding through Small Business Service. I'd have to go back and do that, but it was really helpful in trying to pull it together because there were all these disparate types of agencies and nonprofits working together, but thinking about these sort of like on the ground issues that we have around safety and health and drugs and homelessness. So I'll do some research to try to think about that, but I'm curious where, like, and that's why I think you said DCLA, is that some intersection of interagencies coming together?
I thought the district attorney's office would be interested in being invited to.
Yeah, they were amazing. In Brooklyn, I will say they were like a driving force of helping think about innovative ways that aren't just about locking people up, but really thinking about centering care. So actually maybe I'll just move on.
Yeah.
One more thing back to the safety with the Chain and Tang. We met them when they first came here, years ago. I worked with Matt and Corey's office on safety for a while, and then more recently during COVID with Eric's office, the DA's office, Midtown, South, and at least 20 different agencies in the area. And then we've also tried to change the parking on the street, because one other, aside from the drug use and the physical attacks they have been receiving, Eric's office and the DA and some other NYPD were there. So they cleaned it up a little bit. They were there in January and I got them to have a face-to-face meeting. The other challenge that theaters have is they're on a street that there's no parking. All the parking is taken up by the VRC vans. So when they unload and load sets, they're getting tickets and they're parked in the middle of the street. So I wrote a letter and we're trying to get them, we got it to transportation, we're trying to get them a loading zone so that they can actually load and unload their sets. They were really handicapped. I mean, with the people wandering in, attacking the artists and the guests. sleeping in front of the door and drug use right in front of you. They couldn't even park and unload, and the NYP was giving them tickets just to unload their equipment. I mean, so they have struggled the whole time. It's getting better, but it's taken, I probably have 1 million emails.
Super. Okay, go. Good. To be continued. I think we have a lot of work to do on this. Randy, thank you very much. Last words?
Yes, because I forgot about one big thing I should mention, and then that will be my last word. There's rezoning right in the garment district that's coming. This is it's an opportunity. Let's just think about artists in this moment. I don't want to, hang up this call without putting a bug in your ear to make sure that you're prioritizing artists when it comes to the rezoning in the garment district.
Good call. We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you all so much for having me. I'm here as a resource if you need me. That's my dog saying goodbye for tonight. Have a good one, everybody.
Right on cue. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
there you go. The dog had the last word.
Absolutely.
So switching gears, we have a presentation on a topic that is going to get a lot of play from this fall in the school system. Dr. Madison Dutson is here to speak on her research on children and reading. So I'll turn it over to you, Doctor. Introduce yourself and your project.
Hi all, it's great to be able to sit in on your community meeting. Just first off, thank you for all the time that you put into this. I know it is not a small effort. And so, yes, Alan and I met at a presentation where I presented this research, and we thought it could be a good fit to share with you all as you work on rethinking the reading education plans for the school district. Is my understanding. There's some adjusting going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share the research presentation that I gave out that time. This is obviously just one small slice of the research that is being done. I work at Bellevue Hospital and at NYU, and I am a resident physician in child neurology and neurodevelopment. And so again, this is just like a small slice of what we're doing. Bellevue Hospital has a long-standing history of really incredible research pioneering programs such as Reach Out and Read, where kids are given books during their doctor's visits. And they have really great behavioral and developmental pediatrics. And so this is just a little slice of the work we do. Let me see. Okay. So again, the slice we'll get today is talking about the influence and the importance of independent reading of children, specifically in regards to their language achievement when they reside in Spanish-speaking households. So reading and education are one of my favorite things because it is really incredible how much very small interventions can do for a child throughout their life course. So we know that early parent-child reading promotes children's academic excellence and also correlates with their English language arts achievement. And so that includes like what we think of as typical language arts in a classroom, like reading, writing. And again, the achievement that kids develop over the course of even just kindergarten to second grade already has huge impacts and is a predictor of lifelong health outcomes. Reading on grade level can reduces the amount of chronic disease that kids have, lowers incarceration rates, improves longevity. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's an incredibly simple cure-all, and I'm all about the prevention side of things. So we know this is an incredibly effective tool for kids and for parents. And especially as our city is really in this critical time where we have so many immigrant families who are coming, primarily who are Spanish speaking. I see them every single day in the hospital and in the clinic. These kids are going to come into our school systems, and how can we set up a system that is ready to support them, that will help them get on grade level and stay on grade level so that they can be successful, productive members of our community. So first of all, there's very limited research in this area, but we do know that early reading proficiency in Spanish language is associated with improved English language outcomes, but we don't really know exactly how this happens, which makes it difficult to find interventions and ways that we can use it in our practice to help support children. So we do know that early reading aloud in English is linked to independent reading, so children just reading on their own. And then that independent reading, we also know, is related to how well kids are doing in their English language scores. And so our work in this piece of the data was just looking at how fostering independent reading can be an important mediator in helping our kids in Spanish-speaking families have better English language outcomes. So again, we were using this data set that we have to evaluate how these language outcomes in Spanish-speaking households are mediated and affected by independent reading. This is an extremely unique study because it is very difficult, if anyone has ever done research, to really prove causation. It's easier to say this is correlated with this, but it is more difficult to really pin down a chronology of what's happening. And because of the decade of research we have that has been following these kids from infancy to now 4th grade, we're able to pin down a little bit more of that, a little bit more of the time course and a little bit more of the causation than we would be able to do in other cases. And so again, all the kids in this study were recruited at Bellevue Hospital at birth. The English and Spanish-speaking families are included in this larger study, although this smaller cohort is obviously just Spanish-speaking. And so the things that we were looking at in our data was first our parent-child reading, which we assessed based on surveys that were given out to parents. So specifically, this data looks at the one that was given at 54 months. The mediator, or the other piece of the puzzle that we were looking at, was children's independent reading in 2nd grade. So a few years after, we were looking at how much they were reading with their parents. And then the outcomes we used are both surveys that we have from their teachers and also an accredited letter word identification survey that is widely used in similar studies. And so then for covariates, these are the things that we know could affect the outcomes. And so we controlled for these things. So we know that marital status, children's assigned gender, maternal literacy, all of these things could potentially affect our results. And so using our data analysis, we controlled for these variables so that our results wouldn't be clouded by them. And so again, we had, I won't bore you with the statistics, but our goal really was to try and define these relationships. The sample that we used was about 100 kids in this study. 99% of them have parents that were not born in the United States. Most of them were low income. 70% came from homes with very low maternal literacy, and 44% were assigned male at birth. this is some data on where our kids are in terms of how much they read with their parents and what they're scoring on these language assessments, which is pretty standard for the population that we're receiving. So we know that this group of kids is reflective of the community as a whole. And so again, our first aim is to understand if parent reading has any effect on kids' independent reading, which we were able to prove with a really high value of significance and accuracy that it does correlate. Early childhood reading does correlate with later independent reading. We then dove in a little bit more to these specific English language outcomes, and we saw that early reading and independent reading both had an effect on how teachers rated kids' language development and also how they did on these standardized tests. And so these are the graphs that I think will sum up the stats most clearly for those of us, including myself, who are not stats minded. So this demonstrates really what the aim of our study was. We know that people were really seeing this relationship. Okay, you read to your kids when they're young and they do better later on. What this statistical analysis showed is that when we include child independent reading in the mix, the relationship between parent-child reading early in life and the language arts scores becomes insignificant, which means that this path is actually just kind of like a false correlation. And really the path whereby kids are having improved language outcomes is through their independent reading. And we found that this was true both for the standardized tests and also here for the teacher language arts reporting. And so what does this mean? Now we know that kids reading on their own is very important for their language arts outcomes. How does this match into our big picture of trying to close the achievement gap for kids who are speaking English as a second language, don't have parents who have high literacy or who speak English at home? So this quote to me is the wisdom behind it, and now we just have the numbers to prove it. Emily Buchwald, who was a children's author, said this quote, "Children are made readers on the laps of their parents." And so I think, again, the incredible, simple intervention that all of these statistics and all of these data points really drive home is that parents need to read to their kids at home, and that will help kids read on their own and eventually then have improved language arts outcomes. This means that regardless of whatever language a parent is speaking at home, if they are reading with their kids in preschool, when they're toddlers, their kids are going to do better in school and are going to be able to reap the benefits of all those health and social benefits throughout their life. And so again, as with any data, it's not perfect. We definitely have more we need to look into. And again, all of these results are going to be very specific for the population that we were studying, which is this population in our urban city, low-income Spanish speaking. But again, like the point I just really want to drive home is that parents, regardless of their own English speaking ability, have the opportunity to support a child's success in language achievement, and that focusing on the parents' roles in their child's language development and encouraging children to read independently is going to be a very important avenue to close the achievement gap. And so this obviously is just the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of ways that we can, that I hope that data like this and similar programs will be utilized and implemented in the community. But I think as you kind of like ponder the direction of all the educational initiatives that you have. I hope that this is just one little taste that really drives home the importance of the simple things, just getting books into kids' hands, and those books being in English or Spanish, it does not matter. People need books. All of these wonderful, beautifully strong immigrant families who are coming into our city, who are hoping to make this their home. Our community can be a place where we set them up for success. And a lot of that is going to happen just with the simple things, with books, and with doing our best to not alienate those non-English speaking parents in our classroom, and helping teachers really understand how to engage non-English speaking and Spanish speaking parents in their children's education. So that with a big thank you for all the other people who've worked on this research and who helped put together this project. Yeah, I'd love to hear questions or comments that people have.
Thank you, Ben. Aurora?
So I just wanted, and I apologize, I'm not on camera. I just wanted to say thank you so much, because I've, although I didn't work with Bellevue, I've worked with the Mailman School of Public Health with Columbia, and they did a similar research project doing stuff between 0 and 5. And so yes, what you're bringing to the table is obviously very important and useful information for us to have, as we have an influx of migrants coming in and their families. So thank you.
David wanted to, and then I have a question.
David?
Yes, I wanted to thank you. My question is, when is the threat? I like the idea of, teaching the kids in their native tongue, whether it's Spanish or another language. I mean, years ago, people spoke Italian, Yiddish, and they read in all these languages, and then they learned English for the most part. The success stories that we hear about today. But when is the threshold of or is there a threshold of okay, they're reading in Spanish, they're literate in Spanish. Now we got to get them to transition over to English so they have survivable skills in the future. I'm not talking about the parents, I'm talking about the kids.
Yeah.
So they survive in the society in the future, and now there's a plus. I'm not bilingual. They're bilingual. So they now have a jump, which is good, a good jump. When does that occur?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't think that we have a specific transition point that we've identified yet. However, the hypothesis is that all of these kids are in the public school system. And so they are learning in English at school. And the thing that really is setting them apart from their peers who are in the same, who also speak Spanish at home, who also are learning English at school, is the fact that their parents are putting this emphasis on reading. And they've been putting an emphasis on reading since they were toddlers, since they were babies. And because they have this value of reading instilled in their homes, then when they arrive in these English speaking public schools, the way that they interact with the material, the way that they interact with the literature and the books that they're then given in the public school system changes and allows them to succeed in a way that kids who don't have that support at home can't.
That it, David? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but I think it sounds, it's illogical what you're saying. So.
Hi, Madison. I have a question. Do you know any organizations that are working in the shelters to help the moms, or I'm sorry, parents and children in, either their own, teaching children their own Spanish language or English language?
Yes, so that is a wonderful question. So Bellevue Hospital, we actually work very, and the health and hospital system in general, we actually work very closely with many of the shelters, some of which I'm sure, as you know, are run by the health and hospital system. And so most of the migrants living in the shelter receive their care here at Bellevue Hospital. And so I'm not familiar with any specific English or Spanish learning classes there, but they are coming, you know, into our clinics. And so we have the opportunity to give them, you know, books each time they come to clinic. The things that we are always in need of are more books, especially books in Spanish and in languages that are not English. And I think that really we can't underestimate how incredibly important it is to have those sorts of resources. Parents and families who are lucky enough to have housing in the shelters, they don't have toys for their kids. If they have a book, it's usually literally like the 1 or 2 books that they are given at their appointments with us when they come in for their annual exams or, you know, their vaccines prior to school. And so there's really limited resources for child enrichment and development in literature, but also, you know, just in, I don't know, toys and things like that. So yeah, so they have some connection, at least through us. That's what I'm most familiar with. I'm not familiar with other programs that may be trying to coordinate similar efforts. But.
So it sounds like you're saying that books in Spanish or other languages would be super helpful if we can get them into the shelters themselves, or more to you guys too. But I guess it sounds like it would also be helpful to maybe have some sort of almost like marketing program, right? Like some posters put up everywhere, like reading to your kid makes a tremendous difference or something, you know?
Yeah.
Far more catchy than that slogan. But you know, in the different languages, but maybe in the shelters themselves to let parents know the difference. But I noticed one of the statistics you put up on the screen said, I don't remember the exact number, but like it seems like maybe at least 30% of the parents of the kids in your study did not read, or not literate.
Yes. So
so last year we talked to some group, was it HH? I don't remember who it was. Anyway, who are trying to get ESL classes into the shelters themselves, which is great that we're getting ESL, but it sounds like it would also be helpful if we even had Spanish literacy classes for those, or literacy classes in the home language to help the parents who could then read to their kids.
Yes, I mean, the fortunate thing is that in these early, you know, in early childhood reading, usually the books that parents are reading to their kids are even, you know, for the, as you said, there's 70% at least of the parents in our study had low maternal literacy. So not meaning that they are completely illiterate, but just don't have very advanced reading skills. So maybe they read at like a 2nd, 3rd grade level. So luckily that doesn't preclude them from reading books, you know, to a toddler where it's basically just like duck goes quack. But I agree. I think that those statistics were shocking to me too. And I think that there's a lot that could be done to support parents even in their native language. Yeah.
Thank you. Question. Okay. Thank you for coming. This is very interesting. I'm curious whether you were able to do any controlling for learning disabilities.
Yes. So that is one of the variables that we control for. Yeah.
Hi, Madison, Tamara here. I just want to think we're all just thanking you so much for this study. I've been taking screenshots on my phone, so I don't forget this. What I'm thinking about, and this probably is the fundraiser, and which is why I'm always going back to like what our role here can be. Is at the same time, Jesse was mentioning that there's gonna be more cuts. The library system just fought to not be totally decimated. And I'm thinking about that because I recently, in my day job, just partnered with them on a massive book drive they just did. It's in multiple languages. They're constantly, in every discussion that we've had here the past several months, we're like, the libraries do more. They're doing so much, but yet they're still being cut. So I think about that. I was trying to take such great notes that there's some really great quotes in here when it comes time, which I know that cut's coming, for us to try to advocate for the institutions that are here, that are doing a lot of this work, that have been, I love that this sort of study is proving what they have known and what they have also been researching. So just thank you so much, because in my mind, I'm thinking you were just giving us some more tools in our tool belt to really help and advocate for the partners that are doing this every single freaking day. So thank you so much. And I'm just get the library back in here and be like, how can we support you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And that has also been kind of one of the thoughts that I've had as well, is trying to get families in the new immigrant shelter systems connected with the library, give them library cards, things like that.
We've been totally doing that. My day job is at the Shed, and we've been doing these resource fairs, and the library has been an amazing partner. And they actually had to leave the last research fair early because they gave away like every card they brought, and they bought lots of them. So anything that we can use to support the libraries and being able to do that work, I think is so vitally important, whether that's book drives, they have reading groups, there's so many things, like resources that they have. I'm just really worried about the cuts that are clearly coming to our city. We all are reading the papers and following. But how we can think about how to support the city in prioritizing the resources that we have, I think is super key.
And that being said, I'm obviously just one physician here, but we've made this connection now. Pediatrics in particular is a very advocacy focused specialty. And so you have a horde of, 100 whatever doctors that are more than happy. And, we regularly try to write letters to representatives. So whenever you have an issue that comes up in your community board meetings, like please feel free to reach out to me. I will pass it on to my colleagues. And we are more than happy to use our arbitrary 2 letters after our last name to try and get attention onto the issues that need to be attended to.
One more question, kind of related to that. Is this publicly available somewhere? Just thinking about, it's so logical, but then it's like so impactful to see this, and it's just very simple, and really easy to understand. And I think when people see our current migrant crisis, we hear about limiting budget cuts, there often is just like, how can I help? And honestly, like, we're getting ourselves organized with people who are already in the shelter system to say, like, is there a way for us just to buy, just get money, just buy, and we'll have people just buy books. It's a really easy thing for an individual or some of our larger companies in the city to help fund. So curious whether we can actually use this.
Yeah, the horrible thing about research is it often is in those, I don't know, like subscriber journals or things like that. This was presented at a conference a couple years ago, is where this presentation kind of lives, but I am trying to work on like an op-ed or something like that, with similar information, a little bit more tailored to, kind of like the advocacy end of it. But those are, notoriously difficult to get approved, especially here in New York. But I'm more than happy, to, write up a summary and distribute it. If you want to, a copy of the presentation, like I'm more than happy to send along to anybody who needs it or is interested.
Yeah, I think it'd be really helpful just to help spur the conversation.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Thank you, Madison. I just want to pick up on one point that Tamara had made. This is really a Jessie question, I think, is can we do a book drive? We've done co-drives.
Yeah.
This is something that we loaded Jessie's off. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
I know we have lots of parents whose kids tend to age out, they don't know what to do with the books, they don't know where to put things, so what can we do? Jesse?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking if we could do a book drive. Is that clarity?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think in my experience with that is that we can easily do that. The question is where are we sending the books? And so, I mean, I think if Madison can help us with that and giving us some leads and stuff like that, I think that sounds great. I obviously we have our own connections to the shelters, the HERC sites, and the DHS sites that have children there. But if we're looking for if there are specific books, even with that, if there's Spanish language books, things like that, I think that would always be helpful. My fear is because I have done this, that like you said, everybody's got books, and you can't even get rid of books to like thrift shops now. Like they just won't take books. So if we say books, like we're going to get over inundated. And so I just want to be careful about it. But yeah, I think we could easily do that as long as we understand where they're going and have a working partner on it. Sure.
Just as a little thought on that, and I know you said you had a question too. So, I'm on the board at BRC, and they did a book drive for books for a bunch of their facilities. And they have adults in their facilities. And I helped organize some of the books. People really were just donating like whatever they had to donate, right? And you were getting like all these medical texts and all these other things. Like it was like bananas what people were donating. So it seems like if we did a book drive, like it might be really useful to say like, for third grade and below or something, you know what I mean? Like we are not looking to have people just dump all of their books on us.
But I think what she's saying is they need spend.
Exactly. Or maybe both, or maybe like for every book in English, please donate a book in Spanish or something, like, if we can somehow encourage. But yeah, we do have to be careful about not just like letting people know like, oh, you're trying to get rid of your books, give them to us because we don't want them. Yeah, that's a good point.
Is there a question?
Yes, I have a question. The diagram that you showed earlier, the triangular one that showed the correlation between kind of the three ideas. I was wondering, it seemed like independent reading was what was fostering this like higher ELA. Are there any other like ins or childhood experiences that contributed to like a love for reading like as you grew up, or was it mainly this parent-child reading relationship?
Yeah, that is a great question. Definitely, I am sure that there are a ton of other things that contributed to it. We looked, deeply into the data that we had, and this is the one that just over and over again was showing as a significant correlation. And so for the data, we have, which is fairly, like it's a fairly broad data set, actually. It just has been really wonderful to work with, but this is the one that really came up over and over again. But I'm sure that there are a lot of other factors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a note, in terms of getting books, Guardian Angel closed this year. And my wife, who works at Bellevue, works in the Bellevue Association, called, actually, I forget her name, Madison, the lady who runs Reach Out and Read. She came down with a SUV and picked up maybe, I would say 18, 19 boxes of books that were from the school. So I don't know if the other Catholic, we have a dozen Catholic schools that have closed. So I don't know if they've already, given away everything, because everything got tossed, chairs, tables, was used, but we were able to save the books as it comes. So if we have any connections to any Catholic schools that are closed at this point, that might be a place. You're going to get books in excellent condition.
Do they have Spanish language books too?
Right.
Okay. Well, even some of the picture books are fine. I mean, when we're talking about resources and helping each other, like I did call the school principal, and you know, it was kind of like after you texted me, but yes, but it was like a week too late, and so they ended up dumping so much stuff, which was just painful to hear. And she felt so bad about it, but it was like, you know, there's such a need, and it's like, you know, we are this resource and we're here, and how do we get that out, that, you know,
Yeah.
you are a school that's closing, how do we work with schools and.
Yeah, I go to school still, so I think if we figure out logistics, I'd also be happy to like set up a book drive for like our lower school sector and see if there are any like Spanish language books, because I know we do have a pretty decent Hispanic and Latin community like within the lower schools, so like we figure out logistics of like where to put these books, and be happy to set something up.
Okay, that'd be great, because we might be able to work with one of the perks directly, and just in that way, we'll just get our hands are off of it, right? Okay, thank you so much, Madison.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Moving on. Budget time. So, generally, we have a backlog of resolutions and letters that we reach back to promote budget requests. We didn't do that many letters this year. We had about, I think, a half dozen letters, various agencies that were rough to. They put it in, I think Jesse might put it in Dropbox. Most of our requests obviously goes into education. So what we've done in the past, we've sent out letters to various principals, budget requests, notices we get back. There's a list of rewards, budget rewards that were initiated by the city council. If you go on, I think it should be in the Dropbox. Eric sent it out on his email. There's a lot of stuff that we had requested. I went back and looked at some of the things like bathroom requests for various schools. A lot of those got funded. I think environmental services, environmental sciences got a new kitchen. So a lot of good money went out to a lot of the schools. So we could still probably do some outreach to the principals at this point. We're going to try to set up an appointment with the two superintendents, one for the public and middle schools, and one with the high schools, to try to get some feedback in terms of what they feel we need in the schools going forward. There isn't anything else from this year that would fall under the street light. Like we used to, we had a couple of things with sanitation, but a lot of things that we asked last year got picked up. The composting initiative got off the ground. Basket, still a problem. I would assume that got off the ground. So most of the requests that we'll probably be looking at is going to be education. We did have a couple of letters that went out under arts and culture. We always put in plug for more money for arts and culture. That's standard. The other thing that we do besides a request, there's a narrative in front of every list that you notice story, so to speak, about what we think the community is lacking, what it needs, where it should go, which is separate for education, and there's also a culture one that incorporates art. So it might be helpful if you have any ideas about what you think culturally arts we want to incorporate into that narrative. Maybe we can put a couple of ideas together. I know who's going to write down. Looking there.
Me?
We'll write that. So going forward, if you have any ideas about, the narrative for education and culture, maybe just a couple of sentences, just to, lay a foundation down, so we can expand on that and put something out in that.
Did you say we're gonna speak to the principals in the district and?
We're gonna try to set up, we've done that in the past,
Yeah.
set up, meetings with, it's usually a daytime.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of those, and those are very helpful.
So yeah, everyone here will be invited, so just look out for an email, and usually they're just gonna give us a time and we can just, whoever can make it, but we'll do. Kelly McGuire, who's our District 2 superintendent for K-8, and then we will also do the high school superintendent, who we just have started creating a relationship with them, but we have 20 high schools in this area, and I feel like, we could spend some more time with them. We've reached out to principals in the past. We have a great working relationship with all of the PSs, the elementary, the high stage, much harder. And so, I'm just gonna reach out to the superintendents directly, and then maybe in the spring, we can start, this would be for the next cycle, but you really have to start in the spring. And there's lots of overlap with, Eric's office, and maybe Matt can talk about this a little bit, because the school funding comes from so many different places, and city council is one of the big places, and then we also have the borough president's office. So we kind of get lost in the mix sometimes, and there's so much overlap, and so we don't want to really have to duplicate that. So maybe you have some ideas on like what we can really target.
I don't know if this would help, but I can, before the next meeting, I was just working on it for parks today. I can kind of do a truncated version of our budget asks for last year and what was funded, what was not, what was the response. And then you guys can see what was our first ask, our ACE's first ask, and then kind of where it was in CB4's for asks. Like, it could be our first ask, third on the list, or, and then so at least you could see what is we've asked before, and B, continuing support, and then see where new asks fit in, because it might be easier than to plug in, instead of kind of working from scratch again. If you want me to do that, I can. It's color coded.
I mean, Leslie, just so you know, that's already been. I already did that for all of the committees. I think color coding would be great, but it's in your Dropboxes now, so. Each committee is broken out with expense and capital.
Wow.
Sorry. I'm
Jesse,
saving
you're
you
a
for.
Jesse, I was looking at it all afternoon. Why don't you tell me before?
Does it every year?
I sent it to you a while ago. But yeah, so if you open up your Dropboxes, everybody, you'll see the statement of district needs from last year, which you all voted on. And then you'll have two spreadsheets, one of expense, one of capital, which is, and it's if on the bottom tabs, it's broken out by committee, and you'll be able to see what your top capital and expense requests were, and and I left the ranking from what the total ranking was, so you'll see if it was number 5 or number 3 or whatever it was in the grand scheme of things. And then at the far end of the spreadsheet, you'll see the agency response to that, the agency's response, and then actually the mayor's response, the mayor's office's response. So, which is typically the same thing.
Can you remember any big asks?
Were there any arts and culture asks that made it to CB4's list?
I think you're both asking the same question.
Of security for certain.
I think that's what Amy just asked here, right? Yours?
Yeah, last year, the final determination of the top 10, how many of those top 10 were arts and culture asks from CB4?
Looks like 2 based on the.
Where were they? And they 1 to 10.
Number 5 was mayor's office of entertainment, expanding Wi-Fi in schools. Number 10 was upgrading bathrooms.
No,
They're not.
Arts and culture.
Oh, arts and culture.
They never make the top 10. We never, ever have gotten anything in there.
We're
You
gonna
mean
get
top 10
one. We're
overall?
gonna get, we don't have.
No,
anything.
there's, yeah.
Yeah, I've been at that table too many times. It's just
I don't know that we made it in the class.
We have in the past.
This last year.
We never get arts and culture in there.
These are everything's.
It's that, I mean, it's, transportation pieces, if there's a whole argument at the table, what's more important than arts just isn't enough. Didn't we have an ask?
I'm losing my mind. Or just, we at least had one this me about like the library and. Didn't we have an ask that was related to library stuff?
Yeah, we've had, yes, restore, New York Public Library, restore funding for adult programming. And also the Columbus branch for repairs, the need for more public transparency and communication.
So it sounds like this year, that's something we should be asking for, right, especially with them facing some cuts, is something related to the library. And then we also, didn't we have a letter this year about the at the shelters, the language, the literacy program?
Yes,
right?
we did.
And is that something that we could?
Yeah, those walls are on there.
Yes. Alan put together all of the letters in a list there, and it's in the Dropbox as well. So it has all of those. All of those letters are ones you certainly can turn into budget requests if you would like to do so. I think as well as with if you're writing a letter out of this committee tonight about the mayor's office of media and entertainment about continuing the study, that certainly can make it into your priority list. My recommendation would be if some folks, if you guys wanted to take a look at last year's requests, see what is, what's outstanding, if we want to keep those, and then how do we integrate the new ones that we wrote the second half of last year and the first half of this year. And if we want to if we want to keep most of the old ones and prioritize those up, move those up, or are there ones newer requests that you all have made in the last year or so that you guys think need to be the top? Because as Leslie knows, it does matter when you get to budget task force, you really need, if you're, you want to make sure that whatever your top 5 are really up at the top for that negotiation to happen.
And also, there has been in the past few years, right, Jesse? I think you and I talked, we are gonna do it again. There's been a survey out and what people in general think is important, like what are the top priorities in general. So I think the budget task force also takes that into account. And it's inevitably, right, the past few years, Jesse, public safety by far, like it like blows away everything else. And then what was it? Then I think sanitation was up there, and what was the third one?
Homeless, human services, homeless outreach.
So I think that also kind of crafts the general list too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing, because the only cultural things asking for support we had was for the new federal theater. So what exactly are we? So we're not really asking for space.
Well, I think we always put in a plug for more funds. Nothing, I don't think there's anything specific. I think there's anything specific.
We recommend you guys sit in on the final budget, just sit in on it and watch how it happens, so you know what happens.
Is it like sausage making?
It's interesting.
You know about the budget task force? Well, Alan's on it.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
That's on it.
But the final decision making, the
You're on it now.
the final meeting where they rank everything, you guys would find it interesting.
Matt, can you speak a little bit about the council members' outreach? When does it start?
Yeah. So I think it's good to be strategic. So I think looking at sort of the previous acts and what was filled, where our gaps will help us, because I think one of the things that we're always a little worried about is like the principals in the schools get a lot of requests from the city council, from the borough president, from the community board, from the community education council. And I think they are like, wait, who am I responding to? Wires across, like, I thought I already submitted this form, so I think it's really smart to be strategic, and we should take a close look at sort of our previous asks from last year and where we need to go from there. So, I mean, you know, Eric, I don't know how Eric really does it this way, but I think traditionally, the application period opens in January. There was a survey that would go out sometime in the late fall, asking principals to rank their, you know, top 3 capital requests. And then they would use that to sort of inform their decision-making into the new year, with those budget requests being adopted with the city budget at the end of June. So there's quite a bit of time to, you know, meet and have those discussions and prioritize those requests between January and June. But I think the council member's office does continue to send out a survey to the schools to get those top 3 priorities. I think the borough president's office does something similar. So, and they do meet, those 2 offices sometime in the spring. They'll compare notes and they'll say, okay, I'm gonna be able to do this, but there's a limited amount of resources, so they try to, you know, match whatever they can to fully fund projects. It's not always possible, but I think sort of getting, like, having that conversation with those offices might be helpful, just to understand sort of what their priorities are and what they're looking at or what they're not looking at. And if there are things that we're hearing, we can sort of inform their budget process and sort of what the projects they're looking at. So yeah, I think it would be, I need to brush up on the Dropbox and the file and see where we are, but I think there's a lot of things there. And then there's things that the school construction authority, I think, has ongoing, like major capital projects that are not coming from the council member or the borough president's office, but are like the big, you know, PS 11, you know, facade upgrade, or, you know, whatever that, like, there are things that go on that are not depending on discretionary funding. So then there's those projects as well. So there's a lot going on. So I think we should be strategic. I think it's like the biggest things. We don't want to put anything else on the school's plate to respond to, especially because it could get confusing. But I think if you're working through Kelly and you can kind of streamline conversations, I think that's a great idea. I guess one thing, there's a question that I had, because I can't remember, when did we sort of like formalize our budget priorities as a committee, and like when does that need to happen? Oh, so it's like this fall. Oh, okay.
That's why it's so hard.
Yeah, because
We're just coming back, they're so busy, they never answer us.
That's the
because they
thing,
just
yeah.
can't, they're overwhelmed right now.
And you won't know until next year sort of what the council and the borough president has received. So it is a little
behind.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, how much do you think the council member funds out of his own funds?
For school?
Yeah.
It's a big part of it. I don't know.
A lot of description, so a lot of the money comes, so are there particular venues that, is it mostly tech stuff? Is it, you know, is it, I mean, I guess every council member is gonna do their own thing, but.
Yeah, I think the technology stuff is, I don't know what was done. I mean, usually it's a big, so it's $5 million of discretionary for the capital money that the council member has. Usually like $1 million of that goes sort of to the schools. The technology stuff is always in high demand because it ages quickly. But I don't know, it's easy to pull up. I mean, we could take a look at that, and I would be happy to
you can
do a little analysis.
50,000 a school.
Yeah, I mean, if it would be helpful to the committee, I can take a look at what the BP, the borough president and the council member put in the last fiscal year, and like just kind of do a little, see how much they put in and where, and then compare that to our asks and just do a little cross-referencing.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, most of the requests we made gets turned down somewhere. It's either we have the funds, no, seriously.
Yeah.
80% of what we've asked for in the last 6-7 years has been, either there's no funding or there's, we need further study, which we've never understood that one. And the third one is speak to your electeds. So those are the three basic answers. So does it pay, Jesse, would it pay to maybe reach out to the, from last year and just ask them, do you still need this? Has this been done or something? I mean, there's a lot to go out. Maybe we could, you know, I know you're shorthanded in the office. You could always, you know, do an email or do it from home, just to reach out to someone.
Are you talking about the from the list from last year, the budget request to specifically the schools?
Yeah, just to see.
We can do that. I can't guarantee you I'll get to everybody, but I certainly can get to a majority of them. I mean, like, you know, and see if those requests are still ones that they are prioritized. And if they say yes, that's great. And if they say no, we want this is no longer something we're focusing on this, then you'll know. And then you can either take that off the list or, you know.
Okay, all right, good.
Inga had something.
Yeah, can I just to refresh on PS 111, I remember a couple of years ago before I got off ACES, they had a problem where they were moving their handicapped kids to the basement because do you guys remember that? And then they had an ADA issue, and then they were giving their handicaps space to the basement with no windows, and then the special ed kids, and they were putting another grade at the top floor. Whatever happened with that? Did that get fixed? Are they still?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's the ramp. We're talking about the ADA accessible lift and ramp that it's been fun. My understanding, Matt, you might remind my understanding it's been funded. Is it completed? I don't think so. The project is not completed, but the project has been funded.
Get in and out, and they had no windows for some of them. This is not a good situation because they moved another grade on the top floor.
Yeah, there's been a need for an ADA lift in that school for a while. It's where my child goes to school. I don't know how they're moving certain classrooms around.
Okay.
It's an incredibly expensive project. Jesse, maybe it happened after I don't remember that project being funded, but maybe it was.
Because that's an important one.
Yeah. There is an entryway in the back that's wheelchair accessible. You can get through from the back of the school, which is now open. I think it was closed for a while because they had scaffolding up. So it is accessible, but the auditorium is in the basement.
That's it.
Which you can't get to. I don't think you can get to the auditorium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm sorry. I apologize. I misheard. Are we talking about 111 or?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. Nope. I retract everything I said.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think. Yeah, so I think that's an ongoing need. That's cool.
That one should be our priority.
Yeah.
They need it.
But just to be clear though, we asked the principals those questions, and the principals decide which of those items are the most realistic and should be prioritized. So I just want to be, clear that that's how we've always done it. And I think, we need to get word from the principals as to what their priorities in each of their schools are.
Okay.
But that's a little bit of a chicken or egg issue or something. I mean, just like, it can be really important, but if the principal's like, look, we've been told it's gonna cost 4 million or whatever the number is,
Right.
and there's no way I'll ever get it, I guess I'm not gonna prioritize it. It doesn't mean it's not important, it just means that they feel like.
Have a huge minority in that school.
Yeah.
Parents, they don't have a strong PTA because a lot of the parents can't get there after work, so I mean, they always,
That's pretty strong.
Just next through, yes.
Yeah.
Is that the same name?
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably, right, they need a lot.
Okay, moving on. We'll figure the budget out. All right, so we've been tossing this, the ACES situation, street light, for a while. It's an interesting story how ACES and street light came about, but I won't worry with that right now. But it is a cute story. So the question really comes down to, where do we put our efforts? The folks want to, not get involved in anything that revolves around something other than education, arts and culture. Could we do maybe, some work that, may not fall into the purview of one of the other committees? We were looking at it a little bit. A lot of the community boards have education as a separate committee. Some of them have arts and culture separate committee, yeah. And some of them have like almost a dozen committees, and not all of them have, 17, 15 people on them. So, I mean, that's another conversation in terms of committees, but we just want to get a little bit of feedback, how you guys feel about either just dropping the S, maybe minimizing the amount of activity, which may not happen, just a normal nothing, because you need for street life activity, you need to be out there looking at something, thinking about something, bringing it to the table, thinking about, if you want to write a letter about something. So there's an effort on the part of the members that Blake did a lot of that work last week. But a lot of it, bounces off on the committees, especially transportation, which for some of these items, they have the history and the backup, and the people who so you say anything? Yeah. So
David has his hand up.
okay, David.
Hi, yeah, I mean, the reason I'm on this committee is because of street life. So I don't know what, if they were to, let's say you were to separate from street life, which is fine. I mean, that, because I know the original reason there was a problem with quality of life and stuff like that. What would happen to street life? What would we, I mean, it still needs to be addressed. I mean, are you saying it would just be taken over by transportation and possibly, the licensing, business licensing committee? I mean, what Blake did a very important function. I worked with him a lot. So I mean, where would that go in the scheme of things?
Well, if you look at what has been done through this committee in terms of local street life, it's really been a lot of transportation stuff. It's either been garbage, it's either been, it's been mostly garbage, and a lot of other things, which kind of like piggybacks and goes back and forth on transportation. So, dropping the S here wouldn't really minimize anything that transportation can't think of. There might be some things that come along that might be of interest to folks who want to do something on their own and not be part of transportation, but like yourself, maybe some other committee members might want to work on and have a presentation on, write a letter on. So
Well, this is just something that's really, I agree with what you're saying partially. Transportation, has enough on their plate to start adding stuff. I think maybe we might have to, the community, the whole board, maybe not, won't be part of ACE, but I mean, it will be part of the whole board. They need to set up either street life, quality of life, some type of committee that addresses these issues that sometimes committees, overlap. But I mean, I just think that this is very important for the community board, which is separate from this committee, because maybe this committee, the point that you raised for this committee to separate it might make sense, because that it doesn't commingle as much. education and the arts and all that. But so I don't know how to address this in a sense, because if we separate, as I say, if we separate from this, then where do we go? I don't think transportation is the answer. I think a separate committee, but that's beyond what this committee does. So maybe Jesse or somebody from the board can have some input of what alternatives we can have if ACE decides to get rid of the street lights.
I guess the question, David, can I just ask David a question? I think one of the reasons why we've gotten to this point is that we don't really have, I mean, you are working on street life, I believe, like the public, was it the public, you're on the committee for public bathrooms? And that I think is also a transportation sort of, it kind of has to go through them. So I guess the question is what really is street life on this committee? Who's working on it? What are we really doing with it? So if we're not really doing, I guess the issue is we're not really doing anything with it, and that's why the question keeps coming up. So if there are members here who feel like there is something that can be done with it, that works into education and arts as well, because I think it's kind of hard when we have a committee that's going off in all different directions. What can that look like?
Well, that's what I was saying. Right? We're saying the same things, that it might not be appropriate for the arts and education to have street life. But my concern is, and it's, as I said, it's beyond the committee that we're on. It's the committee as a whole, that something should be done with it, where it should be its own, either quality of life or street life on its own as a committee. But that's beyond what you and Alan, I understand that. So I'm kind of putting the horse before the cart or whatever. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, my opinion on that, David, is I think quality, the Q of L committee, used to do a lot of bar and restaurant work. This is prior to ACES, this is what this committee was called, Q of L, right? And really what we discovered was that the best place for that was back at BLP, right? And so that got moved to BLP. And then ACES really was left with managing street fairs and block parties. And that was kind of agreed that really that falls under Transportation Planning Committee. And so I think Josephine's point is valid, that I think unless we've got a real mandate and a real clear scope as to what we're doing, I think either of those two committees can have, similar to what other areas have as a subcommittee or something along those lines of, when those topics come up that aren't maybe traditionally, TPC or BLP, but they overlap into them more than they would overlap here, then maybe that's the discussion you have in those committees. I don't think you're going to get a separate committee created on street life and quality of life, in my opinion. I'm not. If I might be wrong, maybe there's more people that feel that way, but I think you'd get more successful in working with the two other committees on topics such as those. And I would even put WPE in there just because there's so much overlap with sanitation and parks and stuff like that. And so I think that you would probably, it'd be an easier road in that direction.
Okay, I you acknowledge. I do remember the quality of life dealing with a lot of the bars. But my question is, now we talk a lot about street safety and public safety and dealing with the police and dealing with that. That would not warrant a committee to be dealing with that. Just the whole board deals with them for the most part. If there's a problem, with, let's say, if there's a problem somewhere with the police, let's say, what committee deals with that? Like when the police park on the sidewalks for their personal cars and stuff like that. Would that just go to transportation, or how you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different scenarios you can come up with. I think that I will say in my I've expressed this before, that in generally public safety, I don't think the board is really particularly set up. I know other boards have committees on that, and I'm not, if the majority of the board wants this public safety committee, that's fine with me. But I think in general, it's not set up. The board's schedule and the way things happen through the process is not really set up to get things done quickly with public safety, and that's sort of what you want. And so I find the community council meetings to be more effective getting the problems to the police. But if you're talking about things like parking along those lines, I think those are mostly handled, I mean, in my history here, is mostly handled within the office, and setting up a site visit with, if maybe it includes the co-chairs of a certain committee or not. But and then we kind of try to resolve it interagency. And it's not necessarily something that comes before a public committee and has a letter or everything. But I mean, that doesn't preclude it. But I would think that, again, the existing committees would fall under their realm.
Okay.
I have something for Mitchell.
Yeah, David, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think what's come out of this committee has been a lot of street life. I think it is being taken by other committees, and when we were quality of life, we barely got to do arts because we were so inundated with BLP complaints. Now the BLP complaints, I don't know where they go to Jesse. They don't go to BLP, they just disappeared. But our meetings were, long just from BLP complaints. Now, if there's a complaint, it must go to Jesse because it doesn't come to BLP. So that was sort of absorbed, and this became more of an education committee with arts. I think the street life, quality of life function has kind of gone to other committees. I think having a committee with 3 things, and one of which we really don't do very much for, I think the S should be dropped, personally. Being on the committee forever.
Joey.
My question would just be what happens to sanitation, because I think if there is anything in my year or so on the committee that the committee has done is, arguing for more organics pickup. We have these wonderful orange bins all over the neighborhood now. And I know I'm also in transportation, as is David and Alan, and I know that there is a lot of overlap with the big presentation about how buildings are gonna do their trash, and all of that has been in both. And I know, our chair, Christine in particular, is very protective of the sidewalk, and anything that touches the sidewalk, she has an interest in. But I think like the frequency of corner basket pickup is not really transportation's interest. So I would just wonder, if we do lose the S, who picks up the sanitation aspect of the S?
I can't speak for everyone at WPE, but we'll take it.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree.
It would make us stronger. It would make WPE stronger.
Yeah, it would.
I would.
And I think
Which committee was that here? I apologize. Which committee would pick it up?
The important one.
Garbage.
Parks.
Yeah. You're on parks.
You're on parks, no?
David.
No.
Oh.
No, I'm on transportation.
Oh, you're on transportation, sorry.
Yeah, I think so for street life, I think my general feeling is like, it has to live. The most important function to me for street life is that if somebody lives in the district and they say, I have a problem, it is impossible to know that transportation is the right place to go to talk about a lot of the issues that we know. It actually winds up being a transportation issue, but the city is so convoluted, you never know, like, oh, actually, that's a transportation issue. So I think that there's a really important function of street life to just let people know that this is a place that you can come to. It's not just for organizations to make presentations and for developers to make presentations. So I think if WPE feels like there's room in those agendas to take that on, then fantastic. We should just make sure that that's really clear, because I do think that especially during COVID, it was a really good example of how important the S is for this committee, because We had Litter Legion coming, we had them coming and talking about people just saying like, there are just needles on the sidewalk and sanitation won't pick them up, and what do you do? And then that was rats, and outdoor dining. I mean, this is really important stuff that is what impacts everybody's day-to-day life. It then has ripple effects into arts and culture and education for sure. So it has to, my opinion is, I'm comfortable with living here, but it needs to live somewhere and not as a thing we assume the community knows lives.
Right, because they didn't
other
have
options.
before, basically, that's what's been happening.
Yes.
Well, we have the new Office of Public Realm, and I don't know if parks is sort of in public realm too, but it feels, I completely agree with, like, needle on the ground. There's needles on my block every day, who do I talk to?
Right.
The community needs to know. I mean, I had it, before I joined the committee, there was a school bus parked on my block for over a year. I came to this committee, I believe. I probably could have come to transportation too, because it was in the roadbed, but, stuff.
Yeah.
So are you saying just move, is someone saying,
Yes.
suggesting S to WPE, that's
So it would be
WPES?
Yes, so that people know it has a spot.
Jesse, what do you think? I agree with Wendy, to the extent that
Yeah.
there are some topics that fall through the cracks, right? It's not gonna, and I know people say, well, that's transportation, but it's transportation because transportation makes it transportation. Their committee, it doesn't necessarily, it's not a transportation issue, but they'll, take it over and they'll take it on, and that's good. I guess my question is, has the S in ACEs in any way, shape, or form ever hindered us from talking about anything we wanted to talk about? Has it ever hindered us from talking about an education matter or an arts matter? I don't think so.
No.
It's never.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, I don't understand, why get rid of it? I mean, it's not like it's not stopping us from. I mean, I think it's nice that we have a place that people can go if they're like, holy crap, what to do about the drugs or whatever.
The rats.
Yeah, the rats. And frankly, graffiti, I think all of those issues. And then if WPE wants the sanitation issues, we can then, if they come to us about sanitation issues, we can say, over to you if you want them. But otherwise, I think it is useful for people, as you say, to know that there's some place where you're like, and wasn't it this committee where somebody said hey, I'm just wondering, what about all those people now, whether it's on the subway or sitting around, trying to sell snacks or candy or water or whatever, and with their little kids with them, what can we do about that?
I'll bring up an example. I remember I sent to you last month about Muddy Paws, which is it's like a dog rescue. And they're a nonprofit, and then, they said, oh, we would love to come. And I said, hey, guys, your street life, I guess it would be, rescuing dogs off, it would be would it fall under street life? Would it not? Where would that, something like that, some really weird.
Muddy Paws had a block party, and they came to transportation to get,
But that was the permit for the, close the street, yeah.
But is that street life or is that transportation then?
To a degree.
A block party, maybe the block parties could be here, but I mean, maybe.
Block parties have historically been something that's street life, like parades, pride parades to come through and say this is what we're doing and things like that. Obviously becomes a transportation issue as well. I also think there's, for something like an organization like that, to the earlier point, we were talking about our role connecting arts organizations and need and education. I think there's also a nice catch-all with street life as just we are connectors, and it helps to know that now an organization like Muddy Paws, if they came, it would be great to know that they exist, because I think it's not really street life, but it is kind of a part of the culture to have a nonprofit like that in our district.
Well, let's look at how the process starts. So if you have a problem on the street, you're not gonna call transportation, you're not gonna call races, you're gonna call.
Jesse.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is a way to handle certain items that shouldn't be ACEs, or and it should go to either parks, or should go to transportation. So,
Jesse, how do you feel? I asked this before, I'm sorry, then I cut you off after I asked you. How do you feel about having S going to WPE, or how would exec feel, do you think about S going to WPE? As Inga maybe said.
I mean, I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I don't know if it's you literally put the S at the end of WPE. I guess I'm going back to a little bit to what Josephine said, and it's not so much about people to me, coming to the board and wanting to know where to bring these issues, because I might be wrong, but I feel like most of those do get resolved with, district, either through our office, getting 311s and then me reaching out to the agency and trying to get it resolved, or working with, the council member's office to get it resolved. It's a, a quality of life issue. Yeah, and the same thing goes for BLP. The reason why we're not seeing a huge amount of what we used to see in Q of L, which are these kind of like, I don't know, hearings about bad operators, is because we created a nuisance reporting protocol, which really, puts a heavy emphasis on engaging directly with the owners, and then 311, and then the community council meetings and things like that. And that usually resolves most of the issues, through that process. And so I really do think it's more actually it's more about you guys being representatives of the community, bringing your ideas and things like that. I mean, I think Blake did a lot of work, but that was because Blake was doing the work. It wasn't because people were coming to, maybe I'm wrong, but it wasn't like people were coming to Blake and complaining to Blake, but that was Blake's interest, and so I just think if it's of interest, if the committee is interested in it, I'm sorry, that's a long answer to your question, Leslie. I think if WPE is interested in the sanitation component of it, right, or things like that, then I think that's great, and you guys should discuss it amongst yourself as WPE and take it. I think I understand that the street life component, putting the street life at the end of this committee, doesn't hinder education or arts or culture, but I will say it does set a message just to say, well, what is street life? And that's what I go back to. What is the scope of this topic, right? And so, we're not overlapping unnecessarily with other committees or writing resolutions, letters that might be in conflict with another committee's previous letters on this topic and things like that. And so that's my concern. And so if we define a scope that we're all comfortable with and it stays in ACES, that's great. If we're okay with WP taking over the sanitation, transportation has taken over the street, the block parties and the street fairs, and BLP manages the whatever, bar and restaurant issues that arise to the point where, they can't be resolved by the police, which, is very rare. I think we're okay with that, but that's up to you guys.
I always take with the notice, right? Unless folks want to make a decision on.
Committees that we're considering, like, can they deliberate to see if it makes sense for them?
Right.
I think for me, there seems to be alignment. For me, it's like the scope of something needs to be aligned as we think about like budget priorities. And sometimes there's inherent conflicts between, like, it's why with some topics. So, but maybe it's like going to those committees to be like, hey, we've been thinking about where's the best place to put sanitation. Sometimes it's even helped to me in some ways, and like, or can you define environment to mean the kind of.
And we took that on an environment, like we took a lot of composting on this past year, anyway, under the environment, and a few other things that crisscross sanitation.
So maybe it's sort of seeing what your community thinks about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe you can talk to your committee and then see what happens and if there's anything. Because I don't know if there's any members here who want to do something with it, because it's like every month we're trying to set the agenda. And then we have to look at street life because it's there, and I don't want to just leave it on the back burner and we're not doing anything with it. So then the question is what are we doing with it? And it's nothing's happening. So why is it here?
Maybe someone else can do a better job.
I think we're doing a great job. But no, I'm saying it's street life. Yes. But what I just go back to is when Randy was on and talking about the theaters. okay, so there have been some issues with needles and that, so, you know, it's great, you know, we can have the theaters come on and talk about that, and then we could look at ways to try to support them with needle pickup, or what, I don't know, maybe there's a letter we can write, or,
What do
you
the
know.
chairs feel? I'm curious what you two feel. As the chairs.
Well, I mean, I've kind of stated how I feel, like, I don't want to ignore something. You know, we have this committee, and it's supposed to be all of these things, and street life is just, there's nothing. I don't know what to do or where to go with this. Every time I say one thing, it's like, oh, well, transportation is not, you know, business license and handle that, so then why is this here? So that's how I feel about it. But, you know, it's like, I guess, you know, my understanding of ACES has always been that there are things that come in, like Money Pause, for instance, that don't really have another place to go. And I think if you can be somehow tied into education, which I think that Money Pause can, somehow educating the community in some way, then, you know, there's a place for it here. But there's no one actively going out, like I'm actively going out.
It's a request.
Contacting the DOE, contacting arts organizations, what can we do? And the street life is just a huge umbrella. Like, people have been talking about all different kinds of things, the sanitation, the transportation, the graffiti, you know, public safety, that's huge. So it's hard to think of here, you know, what direction we're really going to go in. So that's why we're asking for your opinions on this. And I did do, like, you know, I did a quick check of what other community boards were doing, and most community boards have a separate education committee, they have a separate arts committee, and many of them also have separate either quality of life or public safety or / public safety committees. Sometimes it falls under parks, but they're never with education or arts. So, and then that kind of makes sense to me why that wouldn't be there. So that's what, you know, also got me thinking about.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as I mentioned, a lot of the boards have many more committees. They don't have, oftentimes they don't have 12, 15, 16 people on a committee. Right? So they have 7 people. You have like a public safety committee in money, they have 4 people, 5 people that maybe doesn't even meet every month. They meet every 2 months. Some of these members meet every 3 months. So we're working around a very small cluster of committees where you're trying to fit things. We only have 6 committees. So if you ask what the scope of street life is, the scope would be where it doesn't fit somewhere else. So that leaves a lot of things going somewhere else. Whereas, as Wendy said, there should be a place where somebody can come to a public meeting. That's where and I think we're the only ones that have public sessions. I don't know if you get any of the other communities picked up on it, but you come to a public session, you see street life, and you come to a public session, just as if you're going to the precinct house and say, here's what's happening in my neighborhood, like Charlie came and said, what's happening in my neighborhood. If it's something that we can work with, we'll work with it. If it's something that we can't, then obviously there's a better place for it. It'll go to a committee that has more of a history.
I mean, my only response to that is that most of those issues have been going to full board, especially during COVID. We had lots of stuff happening in the streets, and I believe that there should be a place for that, but I'm not sure it belongs with, you know, when we have a principal on, or, you know, it just, I don't know if, you know, a lot of the, you know, specifically public safety issues that were happening during COVID necessarily belong on this committee. Like,
Well, the only reason why is because we're on a public safety committee.
Right.
And the only reason why it was going to full board is because we don't have a public safety.
Exactly. So
That's not something I would take on.
the precincts and schools, it's not the same.
Any separate,
Right.
it's separate or I guess taken up the way.
Yeah.
it is. So,
I agree.
So you're gonna look into it.
Yeah, I'll go back to WPEs. I have a few WPEs.
All right, so Leslie can get back to us, like maybe next month, we'll check in with you and see what happened.
Yes, and why don't you-
Well, that's about sanitation going.
Just the, yeah, just the dance.
It's not about,
I think it's a good, I think it's a good thing.
Next meeting, we can take this up there and see what, what everyone thinks.
I think that's a good fit. Parks and sanitation, environment. and
Yeah,
sanitation.
environment and trash.
So we're almost at 9 o'clock.
Okay,
Thank you everyone for coming so much out in the rain. So nice to see everyone's.
I checked, and by the way, the rain's supposed to stop.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, yeah, then you
Oh, yeah.
need a motion.
Motion to
Yeah, we need to
adjourn.
move.
Okay.
So no letters, nothing, no letters?
Yes,
no-
yes,
You
you
don't
are.
have one. Wait, which letter?
Yes, we
Did we
have
have
one.
one letter?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, we did. One letter to the mayor's office regarding the update on that. I'll do that.
All right, are we all good, everybody?
Good. Thanks, Jesse.
All right, have a good night.
You do.
Mm.